Hi, and welcome to The Curling Show, the podcast that brings you interviews with the sport's top athletes and the people who shape the game. I'm Dean Gemmel, and with the summer months upon us, it's time to look back on the year that was with a guy who covers curling around the world. The editor and publisher of the Curling News, chief promoter at curlnews.blogspot.com, shoot for the cure promoter, and World Curling Federation media relations officer, George Karrys. Welcome to The Curling Show.
Dean, thank you very much.
I think you need a couple more titles in there, George, but we'll stick with those.
I'm working on it.
Hey, there were the typical bumps along the way, but I'd say this past season of curling felt, on the whole, like a net positive for the game. Was it a fluke that you didn't have to cover one of the seemingly annual controversies about things like budget deficits or melting ice at a women's Worlds? Or do you think we might mark this as the year when curling started to get its act together?
Yeah, I think the latter comment is accurate in this stage. A lot of things that really seem to attract unwanted attention and take away from the fact that there's some pretty good games on the curling ice in various competitions just seem to up and vanish this year. And, there's a new guy in charge in Canada, which is usually the magnet for most of the controversy around the curling world. Greg Stremlaw at the Canadian Curling Association, and I think he's running a fairly new and interesting ship over there.
Yeah, well, your take on him is positive, I gather, and I think he has done a fine job so far. I hear news that he's maybe closed that deficit a bit.
Yeah, well, he was brought in as a fixer. He rescued a ski resort in his previous job, and he's a turnaround artist. So, if that's goal number one, then I'm certain that that's what he's focused on, and it should be. There's no doubt it's going to be better news. Just how good the news is in terms of the financial books will be known within a couple weeks at the CCA Congress.
Let's start at the end of the season with a couple of World Curling Federation properties, the Women's and Men's World Championships. First, the Women's Worlds, where the sport was one perfect freeze away from a China-Japan final. When did you start to think these teams, especially China, were this good?
Well, I've been on site at previous Worlds watching these guys. I hadn't seen the men too much. It's easy to say that a lot of Western Canadians see both the men's and women's teams even more than Federation officials do because they're so active competing in Canada at the various spiels out west. But, internally, we at the Federation had known it was only a matter of time before they break through, and to have them both do it in such emphatic fashion the same season, and also for the men, too. I mean, the women got all the glory, almost winning the whole thing and getting silver, but the men hadn't even been at a Worlds previously, and to make the playoffs is just an outstanding accomplishment for them. Basically, the world of curling knew this day was coming, and that day is here.
What's your take on, there's some, concern, I think, in Canada about suddenly a team like China emerging where they have a hand-picked team and that gets to play and use Canadian facilities all year long. What's your take on that?
I don't really have a problem with it. Canada has been exporting curling expertise, both human and mechanical, for decades upon decades. I mean, Rain Turnbull and his gang and Warren Hansen years and years and years ago back in the 1960s and 70s were pioneering this sort of thing.
Don't you think that would make Ray's comments that maybe Canadian coaches shouldn't be able to coach foreign teams a little odd?
I found it very ironic, yeah, things coming full circle. I wonder if Ray ever believed that he would see the day that his initial efforts had proved so fruitful on so many levels. But then again, I don't think Ray was coaching too many teams that were trying to knock off Canadians at that time. I think he was working on development of the sport, taking the sport to brand new markets in Asia and around Europe, and actually teaching Joe and Jan curler the very first time, and trying to just get more people curling at the recreational level in these countries.
But he did coach Eigel Ramsfeld and Deb McCormick and players like that.
That's true. I think some of that's been on a consultation basis, being so based in Canada, but definitely his comments were, I felt, a little bit ironic. The truth is we would not be an Olympic sport, and we would not have the mandatory growth around the world to make it at all interesting for Canadians to compete at Worlds if the rest of the world wasn't being brought up to speed.
On the Olympics, a little back and forth in the pages of your publication, Jill Officer with supporting the Olympics after Wayne Maddock cast some doubts about the net positive of the Olympics for curling. Of course, you played in the Olympics, so I know you're a WCF guy. I know you're an Olympic supporter, but can you see some of the reasons behind Wayne's concerns about the Olympics?
Absolutely, and I think at the time of that exchange, Jill wasn't fully aware of what the context of Wayne's comments were, namely that he was really talking about the fun of the sport. And there's always been a wedge between club curling and what people like to call elite curling, which is now, the buzzword for that, of course, is high performance. And that wedge continues to grow, and the gulf continues to spread further and further from the grassroots through to high performance. Back in the days when, a guy could have a real job and career and just occasionally make a briar here or there, and curling was really just, an exciting but fun hobby, you had all kinds of, debate about this back then. And these guys at the top level always had a ton of fun. I mean, the stories about the Wernick team on tour, and of course Paul Gausel. I mean, these guys were having a ball of fun while competing at the top level. And now a lot of that fun seems to be curtailed because there's federal funding, and there is such emphasis on physicality and of the high-performance athlete these days. So that's naturally going to happen. And Wayne knows it, and everybody kind of realized it, and it's all about the playpen that the top-level curlers have chosen to compete in once Olympic status rolled around.
There is this resentment, or wedge you describe it as, between club recreational curlers and the elite level. I think we see that with the Grand Slam series, where some club curlers don't seem willing to really embrace that yet. I'm a big supporter of the tour, a big promoter of it, as anybody who listens to this show knows. But when you talk, I mean, they had a good year. They got Capital One as a sponsor, and there's some great games. And what do you think has to happen for that wedge to go away?
I don't know if it ever really will go away, to be honest with you. Just talking about it in terms of there being a wedge makes you realize how important that grassroots curling is to the social fabric of the sport. And if anything maybe needs to happen, I would say it could be the high-performance curlers themselves making just a little more effort where possible to keep that club connection going. I mean, a big controversy and subject matter of all kinds of media, including your podcast, have been all the cross-border shopping that's going on here and there.
Right.
The club curler, the average recreational curler, doesn't see his hometown athletes or a team that has chosen to use their club as a home base as being supportive of that base any longer, particularly when 2 or 3 of the players might be from a different province, maybe eventually a different country.
Right. Here's my one take on that, and that I think club curlers need to get their heads around, though, is that young athletes in any country are reluctant to really pursue a sport that doesn't have some kind of professional level. So unless the tour, I think, really can continue to grow and get bigger, it gets harder and harder to get young athletes into the game.
Absolutely. And, for those at the club level, I think they should realize that what they've got in terms of a social recreational activity is priceless. It's generally, it's very cost effective. I mean, curling has been undercharging at the club level for far too long. And that will always be the lifeblood of the sport. I mean, there has been a controversy just a little bit with some summer sports in Canada, such as swimming. The system used to be very club-based in terms of swim clubs, and now high-performance athletes are being plucked from the clubs, and there's a bit of that particular federation has taking a second look at where the club system fits in and has it been too far ignored, as opposed to high performance in the past few years. So, club curling will always be really strong, and by the same token, they feel helpless when clubs are closing, right? I mean, forget the arson problems we have with clubs burning down here and there in the summer months, but, more and more clubs are finding it difficult, and they have to become as professional in terms of running a club as the high-performance athletes are becoming professional in curling itself.
I sometimes wonder if there's actually a decline in interest in curling in Canada. I don't think there is, or it's a fact that a lot of clubs have been in small towns and now have dwindling populations as people move to urban areas, and then at the same time in the urban areas, clubs are squeezed by real estate values.
Exactly, and curling is cyclical. Remember, for so many years it was in the schools, through the 60s and 70s, huge schoolboy and girl competitions, and of course on the curriculum as an actual phys ed curriculum item. And then it vanished for a while, and now it's making a comeback, particularly out in the breadbasket in Manitoba and other areas.
Well, I know in Canada that was on the agenda of Greg Stremlaw, so I hope that continues. I do think that's important, the school thing. Hey, quickly, let's get back to Men's Worlds in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Kevin Martin finally got that international win monkey off his back. On the way, they had a tough loss to David Murdoch's Scottish rink in the Page 1-2. We know these guys are really tough competitors, but were you wondering how that team would rebound after that?
Yeah, exactly, because, if you followed the sport for a while, you know how hard Kevin has tried to get that monkey off his back. You attempted to roll your eyes and go, here we go again. But what a great performance to dig deep, to really bear down and turn the tide in the next couple of games and come home with the gold. Guesstimated and predicted by so many people before this World that this would be, in fact, the one that he wins. Everyone, had a little shudder step as he lost that stage 1-2 game, but it just seemed to make him stronger.
Do you think the Norwegian men would have fared better in the semifinals if they hadn't been forced to play in those great T-shirts they picked up at Walmart on the way to the arena?
I know the boys were complaining about that, and they were cracking jokes, only half jokes really, that they were going to talk to their association when they got home to Norway.
They were funny.
There's another blog out there, Curling Today, which is the official blog of the Scottish curler, run by our good curling friend Bob Cowan, and he is on a personal vendetta for the past year or so against black and dark competitor clothing on the ice. And they're starting to listen to him in Scotland, particularly the juniors. They're starting to come out with almost neon or rainbow-colored stuff.
Well, I think the best uniform thing this year was Kevin Cooey's retro duds.
Yeah, I've got that on my list as almost TV moment of the year, really, when they rolled out with this genuine, actual vintage, purchased from eBay, branded Heck Gervais sweaters. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was an absolutely fantastic moment.
And they look so sharp. That was the thing. I mean, it did look sharp. So
yeah, well, to listen to Kevin tell the story about it, they had these sweaters for a while, but it was the pants that were causing them the problem. Like, do you mix and match with modern, pants, or do you actually try and find something that fits the retro feel of the top section? And it took a while, but they found some Lululemon pants that worked out.
Yeah, which is what, a yoga wear line, right?
Something like that.
Yeah. Hey, what about those Canadian TV viewers furious at the CBC for not broadcasting round-robin play from Grand Forks? I know you're a committed free market Tory, George, but don't you think it's time people cut the mothership at CBC some slack?
Well, it's almost like closing the barn door after the horses have gone, because, of course, the CBC, as of now, is no longer involved in world or even domestic championship curling. That's TSN for the next, 6 or 7 years. So CBC will now focus on Grand Slams, while it's TSN, at least in Canada, it's TSN's ball yard to play in. This is just a classic argument, Dean, and, on the pro side, it shows the deep passion TV fans, not necessarily curlers themselves, but curling TV fans in Canada have for their sport.
Yeah, I mean, do you think TSN gets a bit of a free ride though? Sometimes, I mean, nobody really questions their coverage much. I don't think. Maybe that'll change now.
It has to change as they are the primary rights holder. You could say they get a free ride, but really, look at their situation. They cover round-robin games of domestic championships. They get just hours and hours of coverage. Subletted, if you will, from the CBC contract, and the only time there's potential for even TSN to get any criticism is at the Worlds held outside of Canada for those round-robin games. And of course, because CBC is still involved in the finals, which I understand TSN must adhere to, so I would think that we will still see them at the end of next season in Korea at the Women's Worlds for at least the final weekend. There can be a perception that they're getting a free ride and they're not being criticized for not being there during those round-robin games.
Well, we'll see what happens now. I did like the addition of Russ Howard to the TSN crew quite a bit.
Yeah, I managed to get a couple of his covered games PVR because I was over at other international tournaments like the World Mixed Doubles, but Russ has guested in the past on TSN, and no one was really surprised when he put on a great performance in Winnipeg this year.
Hey, let's go over to Finland for a moment, where the first World Mixed Doubles were held alongside the World Seniors, so it ended up being a fairly massive combined event. Give me the official, but hopefully not too professionally spun, WCF evaluation.
Amazing to see, to be honest with you. In some ways, it all comes down to the actual curling itself on the ice. And you push away all the logistics and all the media spin. Was this good curling? Was this fun curling to watch? And I can't wait for this event to get exposed to bigger markets. It was remarkable. Key to the event, particularly for World Mixed Doubles, and that format is really swingy ice. You almost need as much or more of a swoop that Mark Shurek often delivers at the Grand Slam events. And we had it this year. And as a result, the style of play, the sheer aggression, all those rocks in play, it was really quite amazing to watch. There was one competitor from Norway, a veteran, who has certainly been around. His daughter's Lynn Githmark, actually, who he competed with.
Finished fourth in the event, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we had a huge meeting with all the competitors near the end of the event and said, okay, everybody let us have it. What do you like? What do you not like? We need to know what you think honestly about this. And nobody had any changes to the format to suggest. Everybody gave it a ringing endorsement, and this guy in particular, put his neck out on the line and said, this is so much better than regular curling. It's not funny. I'm actually excited about playing the sport again.
Any thoughts on how clubs can integrate this format in? It's a bit of a challenge. All of a sudden, you got 8 people on a sheet, or 4 people on a sheet instead of 8, and that's a bit of a concern. But any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think if they maybe go back-to-back draws with 6-end versions of that, 90 minutes each game, I think they can kind of fit it into a regular schedule. I think it should be considered at the club level similar to mix itself, which for a lot of clubs, at least in Canada, is reserved for Friday nights and then maybe Sunday afternoons or something like that. For the clubs, I think, as Warren Hansen does, this can really be something different to bring in a new demographic. What about young couples that want to join in curling, and there's 2 of them, but they don't know 2 other people, and they can't put their own traditional 4-person team together? If you sign up individually or as a twosome, new to a club, you get assigned people to play with, and often you don't have really a choice, and that choice wouldn't matter because you don't know these people anyway.
Did you see during the event in Finland, was there strategy evolving as the thing went on because it is such a new format?
Absolutely. One, for example, is the choice of hammer or not hammer when you get a chance to make that change. And Canada was one team, one pair, I guess, that didn't make any changes until their backs were to the wall and they were down 5 or 6 points midway through one of their tiebreaker games. And they switched it around, and all of a sudden...
Which way did they switch it?
Susan O'Connor started throwing the final rock, and that just proved to be a godsend for them. They won their must-win last round robin game. Then they won a couple of tiebreakers, and they only lost in the 3-4 semi, if you will, to finish 5th. So there was a lot of learning on the go because it's a fairly new event. But I will say this: a lot of these European teams, particularly from emerging markets like Hungary and the Czech Republic, as soon as the announcement was made of this format over a year ago, they started training for this. These teams were very well prepared for this, and they've actually got little bonspiels or tournaments in Europe just for mixed doubles. So unless, nations like Canada start taking it more seriously, if they're sending teams to this thing, it's going to be harder for them to win. Well,
I mean, that's an interesting take, I guess, that some countries might be specialists in mixed doubles maybe one day, but... I did hear lots of good things about how exciting the curling was. I guess because we didn't see it, I don't quite know yet myself, but it sounds like it was good.
Exactly. It was really cool to watch on site, and there will always be questions about how it's going to project on TV, just because you don't have, too much yelling or screaming between 4 persons. It's a lot quieter and a lot closer dynamic, a lot more personable between 2 athletes, on one team.
Yeah, the lack of yelling it must make it a little tougher for a broadcast. I always get new curlers when they come to our club to start by yelling.
Well, there's a wheelchair curling team that proved that you can yell for any reason. Now, wheelchair curling, the Paralympic sport, they don't allow any sweeping whatsoever, right? For some logical reasons. But the Korean team that won the silver this year at the Worlds in Switzerland, they yell at every single rock after it's thrown. And, it's quite interesting to see them yelling at the top of their voice, ordering the rock to follow their commands, as if the rock can listen. If these guys can do it, anybody can make it.
Right. See, what I tell people is there's no other time when you're an adult where you get to yell at other adults without any without any retribution or anything. Yell at the top of your lungs at another adult is very exciting.
Yeah, we curlers have known about this subconsciously for years, and it's just something we don't promote to the non-curlers, yelling.
At the last Capital One Grand Slam of the year, the Tylenol Players Championship, we saw another Martin Howard final with Howard coming out on top. Except for Team Cooey, nobody seems to be able to consistently challenge these guys right now, even if Pat Simmons was only an inch or 2 away at the Tim Hortons Brier. With some team roster changes in April and May and maybe some Canadian teams upping their commitment as the Olympics get closer, do you think that situation will be any different next year?
Not at all. Brad Gushu said it best. He was talking about how small the talent pool is in Newfoundland versus the rest of the country and why he sometimes looks outside of his own pocket of talent to build teams. He said it's part of the game now. It's part of the actual game to find the best unit you can find. And, it's been proven over and over again. People focusing now on the Edmonton guys playing with Burtnick and Stoughton next year in Winnipeg. Don't forget what happened to Kevin Martin 2 years ago. He did a wholesale roster change, and technically Kennedy is the only pure Albertan on that team. John Morris is born in Winnipeg but raised much of his life in Ontario, and Ben Hebert leads Saskatchewan Green. So this is going to be the new norm, separation, not only from recreational curling through to high-performance curling that we discussed, but further separation within the top couple rungs of high-performance curling itself. The ABC level, that A level will climb even higher.
Hey, one consistent bit of bad news this past season we touched on already was clubs either closing or in danger of closing. The most recent one was the 8-sheet Oshawa club outside of Toronto. What's the latest from that?
Well, they got a big meeting. I think it's coming up this weekend. Really interested to hear what happens here. There's all kinds of speculation online about that one, but here's a club that year by year started charging the membership more and more to deal with their problem, and they weren't addressing the root problem, and now there's talk of actually dropping those rates and really trying to focus on running a more efficient club with some cost savings, and that includes using the facility in the summer. Can't believe that no curling club, particularly in Canada, doesn't use the facility for weddings, parties, anything in the summer months these days.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's something every club has to do, figure out how to make money from the club all year round. I don't think raising fees is the way to get members, that's for sure.
No, it's kind of proven just to be a temporary Band-Aid.
At least not, I mean, they're talking about a big hike. I mean, I can see we have to be realistic as curlers. I mean, curlers get upset about, $10 increases, which is ridiculous, but they were talking about a pretty big hike in a city that's struggling economically, too.
Well, they'd already had them, Dean. They were already at, let's say it's $500 a year. Then it went to $600 and then $750 or something, and now they're talking about further. So they've been trying to put a patch on this big leak for a while now.
All right, George, we finished with a run back. I'm going to give you sort of a little different style where you're just going to name some things rather than 1 to 3 words, although you're welcome to do 1 to 3 words as well. Event of the year.
I'm going to give that to the Scotties Tournament of Hearts. And
Really?
why? Very aggressive play this year. Last year, a lot of people were falling asleep. Not very aggressive play. This year, every team seemed to be really going for it, and the event was really a pleasure to watch. I don't really know why there was such a huge one-year difference in the way women played at the Nationals this year.
I did think, what the Scotties definitely had on its side was drama this year. Boy, it was, whether you always loved the shot making or not, which I did think was better. There was lots of drama, and that's what sports fans want.
Absolutely.
You didn't name the Continental Cup, though, did you, George?
No, I didn't name that, but hey, that's a great event, Dean. I know you're a huge fan.
I know. It's an old chestnut for me. It's actually costing me. Somebody actually gave me a review on iTunes on the music store and called me absolutely insufferable as a host. His continual moaning about the Continental Cup has grown beyond tiresome. So I'm not going to moan anymore, George. I'll stop there.
Dean, I think we're going to have to get you out to this year's event.
I'll have to see it. Hey, here's another one, event promotional jingle of the year.
Oh, my.
You're a music guy.
But I was at, this was the first year that I wasn't at one Canadian domestic event.
Really?
I'm so busy with the World Curling Federation, it's a given I'm not going to go to Briars or Scotties anymore because there's always something going on, but I didn't even make a juniors or a Grand Slam event. I don't even know what you poor North Americans had to suffer through in terms of jingles.
Yeah, you need to talk to the powers that be on that one, George, and tell them there's other things to do with advertising besides jingles.
Okay, I will do that.
Your curling news commercials, for one, prove that you can do good curling commercials without jingles.
Exactly. Thanks for the plug, by the way.
Hey, off-ice entertainment of the year.
Okay, another strange one for North Americans because they have no idea what it is, but the European Championships were in Füssen, Germany this year in December, and they had something called the Party Zone. And, it was similar to the idea of a Keith's Patch, a big beer garden, if you will, but covered with disco balls and lighting system, so it turned into a huge, dance club overnight, and they had a full sheet regulation curling ice right there in the middle of everything. Yeah,
you posted that on your blog. I thought it was terrific looking. I think that was a great idea.
Exactly. I think all patches now, you got to try and get a sheet of ice in there.
All right, shot of the year.
That's a tough one. I think it's a tie between Kevin Martin round the house to beat Randy Furby in the Page 1-2 game in Alberta. Or maybe it was, that was the second of his 3 straight wins over. And Jennifer Jones, that aforementioned freeze you talked about against Japan.
I think Kevin's shot was in the round robin, but it was unbelievable. Or not in the round robin, whatever. It was the first time they played, right? That was an unbelievable shot.
Okay, so that would have, and that was a last rock ace. That was a clincher, and that probably put them into the playoffs.
Did you say Jennifer Jones freeze?
I did.
Yeah, I that's not it wasn't as dramatic, but considering the stakes and how perfect that had to be.
Yeah, it's nice to get a really cool against the odds draw shot into a shot of the year listing. I mean,
Yeah.
how rare is it that any kind of touch shot makes it up there?
Well, how rare is it that someone can make a freeze that you can't move these days? I mean, I guess Kevin Martin probably still could have moved that, but it was pretty...
Kevin Martin remembers the day he could not move Pale Lindholm's draw in 1997.
Right.
The semifinal of the World. You know, the game was locked and done for Canada. Pea slops that thing down, and Martin just stood there and actually said, you know, to Walchuk, I can't move this.
There you
He
go.
tried anyway, but boom, Pea goes on, wins the World.
Women's team of the year.
Well, that's got to be Jennifer Jones.
Yeah, it's tough not to say that.
I mean, you know, you alluded to the drama of the Scotties, and look at that miracle comeback. She won, 6 games in a row that she had to do? And I'll tell you this, if it was a year previous, you know, when Kelly Scott won the Scotties, and it was that kind of style of play, where people were a lot more tentative, Jennifer Jones wouldn't have had the chance to do that comeback.
Right.
No matter how well she was playing.
Men's team of the year.
I hate to be trendy. That's another landslide. You got to give it to Kevin Martin.
Right. Although, you know, when I think they were the team of the year, but Glenn Howard does make a good point that they had a great year as well.
Yeah, and you tend to forget, you know, the guys who come runner-up, be it a Brier or, you know, a couple slams or whatever. I mean, Howard had an incredible year, but, you know, Martin finally got the gold he's wanted in his whole life. Going back to the 85 Worlds as a junior, he had that streak, although it came to an end of all those Grand Slams. And again, he beat his arch nemesis, Randy Kirby, 3 times.
And I think with that team, there's times when the other teams can't figure out how to muster anything against them when they're playing well.
Yeah, well, you think you've made the shot of your life, and you've really got him in trouble, and then he pulls a rabbit out of the hat.
Executive of the year. There's one that's exciting for the fans.
Yeah, I'll give that to Greg Stremlaw, too. You know,
you should have kowtowed to your boss there, George, and give it to Les Harrison. I mean,
well, actually, think about it. You know, because I'm with WCF, and we're the umbrella organization of, you know, all 42 odd member associations around the world. Technically, in a way, I'm affiliated with CCA as it is. What do you think of that?
Right.
Never thought of that one, did you?
There you go. So you've got it covered both ways.
Yeah, we'll see what comes up out of Mr. Stremlow's big Congress meetings in a couple weeks. But, you know, he's just, anyone's going to be different after 19 years, you know, in a CEO chair. And here's a guy who actually got out of Ottawa, went to all the events, and really wouldn't stop talking to people. And that was a breath of fresh air for a lot of people.
Yeah, I do hear from member organizations that he was at least communicating quite a bit more than anybody has in the past in that office. Comeback of the year.
I'm going to give that to the TSN Skins game.
Oh, good one. Good call.
Gone for a couple of years, almost forgotten. Also, the qualifying events in Canada to get there, which were very popular. And not only are they back at a great venue, Casino-Rama, rock star entrance of the players running down from the stands onto the ice, but high-definition television. The first time North Americans could see curling in high def. It was breathtaking. It was unbelievable. And don't think for 1 second that this is not the future.
Yeah, even apart from the high def, there was a lot from that production for curling event promoters to learn, I think. There's a lot to take from that one. Best off-season team shuffle so far?
I'm going to give it to Mr. Stoughton for getting Mr. Kevin Park in from Edmonton. I think that's a good one. Kevin Park has really been under the radar as an amazing pure shooter for so many years, no matter what his own former teammates, including Kevin Martin, would say to anybody who would listen, you know, and it's you know, he's, you know, you take a look at how curlers tend to be just a little bit older than average athletes in other sports, and you know, K Park is either at the end at or right in the middle of his prime, so we'll see what happens.
You know, what's interesting, what I wish I'd asked Jeff when I had him on after that was if Kevin had come to him 2 years ago when John Meade retired and they had, you know, and Kevin had come to him then, he probably would have been thrilled by that.
Yeah, you'd think. Was that around the same time that...
Well, 2 years ago, when, you know, Ryan Fry initially came on as second, and then John decided not to take a year off, so then Ryan moved to third. If Kevin Park had come to him then and said, "Hey, I can play third for you," I think, you know, Jeff would have jumped at it.
I think he would have thought about it seriously, but would he have actually pulled the trigger? You know, bringing in an Edmonton guy.
Yeah, at that time.
Even 2 years ago, it was still kind of new for everybody, right?
That's true. I mean, it might just be a sign of how the game has shifted, like we've said. Disappointment of the year.
Ooh, I hate that word, disappointment, eh? But there's always something. How about Pale Lindholm of Sweden retires in the middle of the season? He doesn't even make it past Christmas before he throws in the towel. He's a great character for the sport, but I also think he should have finished the season out, to be honest with you.
You should have what?
Finished the season out.
Okay.
If he doesn't think he can go for the Olympics in 2010, you know, he let down 3 teammates too, eh? The Corbell Elite Challenge, the outdoor curling event in New York City. amazing promotional opportunity, but the ice was just horrid, and the commentating, the new fellow NBC found to work with Don Duguid, I thought was terrible. Really unfortunate.
That was disappointing. I actually was there, of course, sent some posts from it, but it was a bit doomed from the start, I'm afraid. You can't curl outdoors in New York at the end of October.
I know. Great effort, though. If they could have pulled it off, it would have been awesome, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, like I said, I think Rick Patsky and the USCA, I mean, it was a good effort, but probably doomed by the fact the weather, and I think it was just, it seemed to be the brainchild of somebody at NBC looking out the window of 30 Rock and deciding they could curl in Rockefeller Center.
I mean, here you and I are talking as curlers about this, but, did it do its job as a media property, as a sponsor property? That's for someone else to answer. I just don't think it looked good, and I know you agree.
Yeah.
And the death of three giants, losing Doug Maxwell and Don Whitman and Don Chevy in the same year, three absolute media, broadcast, writing, journalism legends in the sport of curling. That's almost too much to take.
Yeah, it was tough. They had a great tribute to Don Whitman, I think, on the CBC.
Yeah, and they did a great job at the Briar for all three of those gentlemen, to be honest. But these tributes started when Doug Maxwell passed away at the end of August of last year, and it's just, you take a look at how they were spaced out through the season. That's just terrible. Three
giants did a lot for the game, and Don Whitman, the voice of curling for so long. But I do think, it's a tough spot for Bruce to come into there, but he's done a nice job on CBC.
Yeah, Bruce Rainey I thought did okay, but you can't, I don't know, maybe I'm too much of a traditionalist, but I just couldn't shake there was something different and disappointing about this year's coverage. Just, in the year that CBC leaves events like the Briar and the Worlds for the first time since, the 1960s, I really wanted to hear Don Whitman finish things off.
Surprise of the year.
Yeah, surprise. George Clooney loves curling. Amazing that he was filming, that Perfect Storm movie 3 or 4 years ago, and curling was all over the television at the time, and they couldn't get him out of the room, reportedly, to go on set and film his movie. And potential for a reality show, American Idol meets curling, this rock star curling thing. We don't know if it's going to go or not.
I was going to say, what do you know about the status of that?
Well, they push things along, and they're still trying to find some backing. Apparently, NBC doesn't want to fund the entire thing by themselves. They want to get a corporate partner, but I think time is running out on finding that partner. And Chinese teams, talk about shaking up the landscape. We talked earlier about how it was a question of when and not if the Chinese high-performance teams would start to really do well and make playoffs and all that, but it doesn't change the fact that when you see it happen for yourself so gloriously, going right to the final in terms of the women, and and you see it for the first time. You just feel that curling has crossed yet another plateau, and you wonder how much inspiration that's going to provide to other developing curling nations that have fully funded, full-time athletes who are looking to break through just like that.
Hey, does the WCF have anything in place to sort of help to promote building of clubs in countries like China, or can they affect that at all? It seems like a tall order.
Yeah, well, you talk about any other country but China. There are various programs, including the development program the WCF operates to provide brick-and-mortar solutions for the member associations. We will assist in the actual building of physical clubs around the world. In the question of China, what you see there is the member association putting all the resources to a handful of high-performance curlers, no more than 100 through the entire country, to form the women's team, the men's team, and the 2 junior teams, but they are really missing the whole concept of building the sport from the club level, from the grassroots up. And that is something that the WCF has mentioned face-to-face to China, and we're trying to get them to consider that.
Tricky with China. You don't know who to really talk to.
Well, they're pretty small, and now that they've scored some hardware in terms of the women's silver and the men finishing pretty high up in the world and probably qualifying for the Olympics, we think that that can open some new doors for Chinese curling and for us with them as well.
Quickly, I have to tell you, the WCF, you need to relay to the WCF, the best chance for a new club, I think, is Kalamazoo, Michigan, my old hometown. Or hometown for 7 or 8 years.
I know. I've seen them very active on the web talking about curling. Dean, can I be frank? They look to be taking huge steps forward after you left town.
I know. I spent a lot of time promoting it there. It was a 7-year effort. Then I moved, and one of my good friends there has really grabbed the bull by the horns and 200 plus people at their first event. So
Yeah, that's amazing.
and a hockey arena that could become a curling club in about 8 minutes and $12.
I'm going to put Kalamazoo down with a big capital K in my WCF notebook here. How's that?
All right. Finally, television moment of the year.
I got a bronze, a silver, and a gold for you.
All right.
I got Glenn Howard on Little Mosque on the Prairie, the CBC TV show. You probably didn't see that in America. But,
I see it, George.
Okay, he had a couple of cameos that were pretty darn funny, to be honest. Didn't know the guy was such a good actor. Silver goes to Team Cooey and those vintage jerseys at the Slam that we were talking about. And a shame on the Alberta Curling Federation for not letting them wear them at the provincial.
Yeah, that wasn't too clever.
Last but not least, I'm going to say the whole last end of Jennifer Jones winning the Ford Worlds in Vernon. She pretty much had the game locked up against China. It had been a great game, and Jennifer was smiling and pumping her fist and whooping, and she wasn't the frowning lawyer that we see so often on television. She finally let it all hang out, celebrated the win with her teammates, and it was a good moment.
There you go. Hey, thanks for your time, George. I usually ask teams if they want to name any sponsors. I don't know if you want to name any advertisers, any sponsors, any backers. Go ahead right now.
I've got too many. I
Too many.
don't want to share favoritism to anyone, but hey, I want to thank you and your podcast for another outstanding year at the Curling Show.
Well, we try, despite the fact that I can be absolutely insufferable at times. I give it my best,
Nice.
So, anyways, thanks, George. Thanks for letting me blog, too, by the way, when I was out in St. John's. That was a lot of fun.
You're welcome, Dean. You and Jill Officer, who did so same at the Briar, were almost better than me in terms of blogging. I got to watch out for you guys.
And don't forget Matt Hames.
That's right.
At the TSN Skins game. All right, take care, George.
Thanks, Dean.
Have a good summer. That's George Karrys on The Curling Show. Thanks for being so committed to our sport that you'll listen to this podcast in June. Here's Black Pudding, the band that, unlike your aunt's potato salad, never goes bad on a hot day.